so excited to have the opportunity to do a part two with Rendered Retina. I think they're such a great theatre company and I really love their shows. And speaking of their shows, I have a bit of inside info. They do have upcoming shows in the summer, which they will be posting more details of in time on their social media. So all of their social media will be linked down below anyway, so make sure you go follow that, keep up to date with everything they're doing, because it will be so worth your time, and I genuinely could not recommend their shows more. So make sure you go check that out. And they also have so much interesting things to say about theatre, about the industry, about their experiences. So I hope you enjoy the interview. I wanted to ask you, you all kind of took the uni route, which is not like lots of people do drama school, and they say that's the main thing that shaped them as an actor, as a company. So is there anything else that also shaped your acting journey, and how was the uni kind of route for you?
I suppose just as a quick recap for anybody that didn't see the last part, the guys and I, we met actually in secondary school. Then we kind of did like drama together when we got into like GCSE. We then went into college together and we did performing arts together. And then we went to the University of Winchester where we studied performing arts and then in brackets contemporary performance, which was very much about kind of discovering your own style and the kind of very like devising kind of side of it. And then that was kind of, I suppose, where really the Rendered Retina was kind of formed as the basis of it. Having that freedom in university, in that kind of environment, to be able to try things out and make mistakes, because it was very much like, yes, okay, grades are, I think a lot of the time people worry about I need to get a good grade. But one piece of advice I always give to people at university is that yes, yeah, the grades, like as long as you pass, great. But what's more important is the experiences that you've built along that, like the fact that we were able to kind of play around with a load of different things. We got to try stuff and then go, yeah, I didn't like that, completely throw it away. I know that I never want to touch that again. Or we got to try things. For example, like we did a unit, like one of the units was puppetry, for example. So we don't specifically use puppetry, we don't use puppets in our work, but we use those skills and techniques that come with puppetry or come from puppetry in our work. So although the puppet itself isn't there, we very much use like this kind of like these techniques of like object manipulation, and especially kind of like in form. A lot of that comes from like holding the object and using it in different ways. So having that freedom of playing around with different things and then being able to go, oh, I like that, that's interesting. Oh, and I like that, that's interesting. I want to play around with that a little bit more. That was kind of like really key for us. We're friends, first and foremost. And so most of the things that we did when we were playing around were purely based off of that, like just us as friends being idiots together. And that's kind of like, and that's one of our like kind of key key beliefs is like to have fun, and that I think that comes through in our work. The rehearsal process, it has to be fun, it has to be enjoyable. You have to be able to play around with the things that you have with you, and then to be able to go yes or no. And I think those are the kind of key things for our company, just that the friendship, the kind of complicity, the relationship that we have with each other, those kinds of things of like building the relationship outside of the work is really important. And I think a lot of kind of professional companies will say that as well, that I think you get to a level where let's say you're a company that's auditioning for your show. Everybody that auditions, they're going to be able to act, to perform. Like, they're already going to have those technical skills. But really what sets people apart is their attitude to the work. Whether they're a good and friendly person, whether they're somebody that's a joy to work with, or if they're going to be somebody that's going to, be contentious and like, argue with the director and the other castmates. That's those really who you are as a person really sets you apart um from the rest of the group, really.
I think so, because you can tell when you watch one of your shows that you're enjoying it. And when some shows people take it like really seriously, and sometimes, sometimes that works, but like you can tell if you're enjoying it that the audience will be more likely to enjoy it as well.
Definitely. And it's kind of funny because that we did for a period of time. I'll use it in like kind of the first iteration of form.
Yeah.
Like when we were making that, we were like, this is going to be really like, deep and emotional, and like it's going to have all like pull on all
Yeah.
these strings of like bringing all these like themes across of like the depth of human nature, and then we showed it the first 10 minutes of it. And this was for the Les Enfants Terribles award in 2017.
What's that award? Sorry.
So that was there's a company called Les Enfants who every year they run an award called the LET Award, and essentially they get kind of a group. You put in an application
Yeah.
for your show, and what the prize is basically is that they do like they hold a showcase evening,
Yeah.
and people from different venues come and watch, and then you can basically get a slot at the Edinburgh Fringe festival with I think the Pleasance are the main ones. So if you win, you get like a guaranteed slot at the Pleasance, and you get a bit of like cash injection as well. So we were very lucky in that we were successful in getting that, and we won. But in that showcase evening, we were shortlisted, and they get all the shortlisted companies to come and show like a 10-minute extract of whatever it is that they're wanting to take to Edinburgh. And we went on the stage thinking, deep. And the show, and it started, and the moment that the kind of lights come up, and right at the beginning of the form, there's just the image of like one of the characters, he's asleep in bed, and the lights came up and people started laughing, and instantly we're all like, that's not what this show's meant to be, that's weird. So then as we were kind of doing the 10 minutes, people, the audience that were there, but they were laughing, and we were like, that's not what we intended this to be. We went, well, if people are finding it funny, let's go with that then. And I think I mentioned it last time, where kind of the audience will tell you what it is.
Yeah.
And that was then when we were like, all right, okay, so this show's gonna be funny now, I guess. So, and then that kind of going into it then with that mindset, that then shaped everything that was kind of made after then. The reason maybe people found it funny is because of our relationship, right? Of the way that we move around each other, and the reactions that we were having to our own presences on stage. But weird, yeah, really strange one.
I think you can play to that, and I feel like that happens to me quite often, even if I'm doing like a really serious scene. But sometimes maybe people see like certain elements of themselves in it, or it's relatable, or it goes in a direction they're not expecting. But I feel like that's kind of common, and it's better than having no reaction at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it becomes different when you get to when you get to being a big star, and then let's say the typecast of like The Rock, for example. Let's use Dwayne Johnson. The Rock, we know who The Rock's gonna be. When we go and see a film with The Rock in it, we know who he's gonna be, right? But if he tried to do something else, like if he was playing a different role, I don't know, of the evil villain's henchman, we'd be like, that's weird. That's not right.
Yeah.
Because we now know him as that. But I think when you're up and coming, you have that ability, assuming that people don't really know who you are, or you have that ability to be able to play around with your range. And again, like I mentioned earlier, just play around with those things and see how you feel in those, because you might try something and be like, I definitely do not play the villain, or I definitely don't play the love, that kind of stuff. yeah, and those things are important to learn in your practice, right? You definitely don't want to be learning that on stage when you're in front of people. Like you want to be, you know.
I want to ask related to that, like you do a lot of physical theatre and commedia, and you use a lot of techniques that I assume you learn in your training. Um, so like if you're doing a physical theatre thing or having some of the commedia stock characters, do you put that first and then make the story around it, or do you have the story first and then find what will fit with it?
Um,
Don't know if that makes sense.
yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes it doesn't really happen consciously, I
Yeah,
suppose. We don't necessarily sit down and say, okay, um, for this character, we're going to do it like this. However, I think that because it's something that we trained in, and it's kind of like your bread and butter, right?
yeah,
Like it's naturally just kind of comes through. And so sometimes when in like the Shakespeare shows, for example, sometimes when we are working on a new show and we're deciding how a particular character is going to move and act and sound, sometimes, yes, as a base point, we might go, oh, I imagine him to be like a Pantalone, or, you know, I
yeah,
imagine him to be like Il Dottore, and those are good as like a reference point for us, but that doesn't mean that we are doing a Pantalone, we are doing a Dottore. It doesn't
yeah,
necessarily box us in that way. Um, I think that we kind of go, obviously with Commedia's stock characters, there's always like a kind of natural fit for a character.
yeah,
Um, but in particular, when you've got, you know, when you're working with a show that has more characters than there are stock characters, you obviously have to double up. So if there's two characters that are very much going to be like a commedia character, you need to separate them and differentiate them somehow, which is
yeah,
then, I suppose, where that kind of knowledge and that technique and that bread and butter of that's how we work is good as a starting point. But then after that, you do have to then do the work of like actually then fleshing that out, because, you know, otherwise it does just become very one dimensional with certain characters. And for some characters that's fine, like for those
yeah,
in Shakespeare, for those minor characters like messenger or, you know, gentlewoman, like those are fine. Having those one dimensional characters are fine.
yes,
Obviously then when you're if you're playing a Macbeth or you're playing a Lady Macbeth, like there's more depth to them, and so those kinds of the stock characters aren't enough. And the same with all the like the physical theatre stuff. Like when we're making a show, we're talking about, okay, what's it going to be? I think we kind of just go, yeah, I think it's going to be quite physical.
yeah.
Um, but to us, that's kind of like a given. Like, um, what what is physical theatre? And there's, you know,
Oh, that's a
it,
good question.
it's almost like a problematic term.
Is
Because
it?
yeah, well, if you say like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do physical theatre, like is, you know, I think we kind of like, having trained in it, we kind of have an idea of what we mean by that.
Yeah.
If I was going to say, okay, but is, you know, Pina Bausch's, like, you know, or Pina Bausch's dances, are those physical theatre?
I
Or,
don't
you
know.
know, are, you know, Matthew Bourne's, you know, Nutcracker?
Oh, yeah.
And what about like, you know, if that's on like one spectrum, so if you've got like dance on one end of the spectrum and then you've got, I don't know, naturalism on the other, do the actors not use their
Physical.
physical body to express?
I don't know.
And this is what I mean, like it's not quite, it's not as like cut
Yeah.
saying like it's physical theater. um the
I
way
think.
we kind of picture it is that physical theater is on a spectrum, just like that. So
Oh, yeah.
naturalism to dance, and and physical theater can be anywhere in between that. So for us, the Shakespeare's, and using that kind of commedia, like big like
Yeah.
movement, those are physical theater. But also so is the, you know, the finer details of like movement in form, for example. Like that is also physical theatre, but they're just on different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I guess because I did the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony, and like doing the dance and doing any kind of movement in such a big space feels like physical theatre. But that's very different to how I did it at school, because that was me having a group chat, like searching circus on Instagram, finding something that looked cool and sending it to, which
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the thing to be like. We had one lift, not to expose my group, but we had one lift for about 6 weeks, and we just tried to make a story around that. And I don't know if that's the way anyone approaches starting out.
Do you know what? That is hilarious because we really see that anytime we go into a school and we do a workshop on physical theatre. And it's so difficult because in school you're kind of like this, you're shown practitioners, right? You're shown like, oh, look at this show by Deviate or Frantic
Yeah,
Assembly, and you know that's physical theatre. And so you then go, when you're in school, you're like, oh, so that's what it looks like. That's what it should
yeah,
look. When actually that's not the case at all. Like those shows look like that because they've had the journey of development and process, and the people that set up those companies, those are the styles that they used, right?
yeah,
In the same way, for us, our physical theatre looks very different to that. You know, if you're, again, let's take a Shakespeare for example, that style of physical theatre looks very different to those examples. So actually when you're in school, you're kind of like have this idea of like it needs to look like that, when actually what we try and do is when we're in a workshop with kids is going, we're going to teach you tools to use your physical body to make something. Because you know, let's say these companies might be doing like backflips and all these like crazy lifts and stuff, but your body might not be built for that. Or you might have you know, some kind of physical disability that means you're not able to do those things. Does that mean that you can't be a physical theatre performer? No, it does not. Of course not. But that's, I think that's the key about when we're teaching that stuff. It's about teaching the tools and being like, you can try this as a process and see where it leads you. And it's kind of this big pitfall because they want it to, you know, you want it to look nice, but
yeah,
sometimes that's not what's interesting. Like
yeah,
what makes it interesting, like this is a really like crude example, but when we were at university, like we'd played we were playing around with a thing, and all we did, we were looking at like how somebody like throws a ball underarm, and we tried to like we tried to take away the ball and like look at the actual movement, the biomechanics of the throwing of the ball.
yeah,
And for every person that did it, we were like, no, it doesn't look right, or like it doesn't. You're taking too long on that backswing, or like you're leaning too far forward and stuff like that. But through doing that, we realized, well, of course, it's not going to look the same. Our bodies are built completely differently. My forearm is a different length to your forearm. So of course that the time that it takes to
yeah,
do is going to take longer for me and less time for you. Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So I think that really it's about nurturing those things and getting you to explore your body and the story that your body tells. Because, you know, for me, Tom and Alex, the reason our physical theatre looks the way it does is because we trained in commedia, because you know we've done some movement theatre. We're not dancers, but we've done like movement theatre. We've done, you know, puppetry and all of those kinds of things. Your body moves in a certain kind of way. You know, I studied Tai Chi for about 6 years. So
really,
yeah, so a lot of kind of when you see that in my movements, I have this like kind of this flow to it, and a lot of it kind of comes from that, from those kind of the Tai Chi form. But obviously, that's the story that my body tells. But you know, for you wouldn't have that, you know, unless you did study Tai Chi for 6 years, and I don't know about it. But do you see what I mean? Our physical theatre looks like that because of our bodies,
yeah,
but somebody else is gonna have a completely different thing, and we're not gonna be able to move like them. But that's what's interesting. I think that sometimes new companies can kind of fall into a bit of not a trap, but like get in a place where they're like, we have to make our shows like this, or like our shows have to look like this,
Yeah.
and they have this like cookie cutter format, and I think that in some ways that's good. Like, you know, there are definitely pros to that, but also then you do get stuck in a box kind of creatively as well. If it's like, and then if everybody's kind of if everyone's seeing the same shows and using the same, um, you know, stimuluses,
Yeah.
then you kind of then get shows that don't really stand out.
Yeah.
Um, Again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, I think for us though, it was always, for every new show, it's like we're playing around with new things to like push that boat out, and you know, push the boundaries of what we thought that we could do or what would work. Um, but yeah, it's, you know, unfortunately, there's not. It's kind of very difficult to, you know, tell somebody, yeah, just do
Yeah.
that. You know, quite often, like, you know, when we're in schools and we go like, yeah, just play around, just see what works, and you can see like it's just the cogs are like turning. We're like,
Yeah.
what? And you can't really teach it. You kind of just have to do it. Just mess
Yeah.
around.
That's very interesting. That's not the answer I thought I might get.
Oh,
I thought
really?
I was expecting. Um, so moving on to when you're actually performing, how much does that vary with each performance that you do, or is it quite the same every time? Like, do you think you're going to go into it and be like a bit more feeling the anger, or do you think you go back and you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to be a bit more restrained in this version of anger, and just like
Hmm.
throw it a bit, try different things?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Do you?
And no. You want your show, your product, to be
Yeah.
consistent, right? And this is where it's difficult, right? But this is why it's tricky, because for every show that we do, you
Yeah.
it should be the same show, right? But sometimes if you just tweak something slightly, a delivery of a certain line, or like, you know, the quality of a certain movement, the speed of a certain like section, like, then suddenly it actually creates like a ripple effect, and it has an effect on the whole piece itself. So whereas, you know, sometimes in like a deep emotional scene, you know, you can play up that anger, or you can play up the despair. And
Yeah.
in both of those situations, the scene, although the words are the same and that like what happens is the same, the way that the audience responds to a character is different, and the character journey is almost changed. So that's where it's tricky, because on the one hand, we are really guilty. We are really guilty of playing up to an audience,
Uh,
um, and especially with like the Shakespeare's, right?
yeah.
If, you know, if the audience is enjoying something, you play up. Naturally, you want to play up to it, right?
Yeah.
Naturally, which is good for that audience. However, if they go to their friends and go, "Oh, you have to see this show. It's on tomorrow," and their friend comes to see it, and the same thing, and it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? That's a you've got then received two different people have received two different products.
Consistency.
Yeah, and in some ways that's a given. Like, that's natural with live performance. There's a
Yeah.
lived, you know, there's a liveness to live theatre, and so naturally it will always be different. But also, from a business and a product perspective, the product should be fairly consistent. But naturally, those things do happen. In the Shakespeare's, you deliver a line slightly differently, or, you know, you take a longer pause after a certain bit of dialogue before the next character responds. Like, those subtle changes, we do, like, yes, we absolutely play around with them, and sometimes we come out of them and go, yeah, I tried that, it didn't really work, so now I know for next time not to do that.
Yeah.
Which is good in a sense that you're playing around with, again, you're, as an actor, you're playing and pushing the boundaries of your character. But sometimes, if you look at it in terms of from the audience's perspective, you don't necessarily want to go to a show, spend money on a ticket to a show where the actor's just trying stuff out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
And I guess if you have a quiet audience, it's harder to replicate it if you're playing off the audience.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes it's difficult. We use this form is a brilliant example of this. So that form gets one of two reactions. It's either that people laugh at it, for when
Yeah.
it starts, they start laughing at it, and they come away and they go, "That was so funny," or they don't laugh, and in which case we're like, in those first 10 minutes, we're like, "Oh my god, they're not laughing. Like they must not be enjoying it." But then the other extreme is that they come out from that and go, "That was really moving. I found that so deeply moving, and it was so beautiful," and those kinds of things. So it's very strange to kind of like, when you're on the stage, you just don't know. You just
Yeah.
do not know what the audience is thinking. If they're laughing out loud, great. Then they're enjoying it. But if they're quiet, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not enjoying it. It might just mean it's really sitting with them, and they're really kind of absorbed, right? And they're in that world. And obviously, you wouldn't know unless you talk to them afterwards, right?
Yeah.
About what the reaction was. So it's tricky. And there's, yeah, as much as I'd love to say no, every single time we are absolutely perfect and we do it exactly the same way every single time,
Yeah.
it's exactly the same product. It's just not it, and it's probably impossible that it would be. But
Yeah. Does it feel really different taking a show to Edinburgh Fringe, like performing for that kind of audience?
in Edinburgh, you're competing with hundreds,
Oh, yeah.
thousands of other performers and shows and acts. I think as a performers and as somebody that's taken work to Edinburgh, it can be demoralizing in a lot of ways where you're like, nobody's buying tickets. However, the thing to note is that that's kind of the way that
Yeah.
Fringe is. So like, when the average audience for a show is something like 5 people, I'm just pulling numbers out of thin air, but like, if it's 5 people and you've got five people in your audience for your show, great, you're
Yeah.
doing well. But obviously, if you're on the stage and you look out and there's just a bunch of empty seats,
Yeah.
you know that of course that you can take that to heart, but that's that's the thing about Edinburgh Fringe. Like, you're in competition with a lot of other shows, and that doesn't mean that your work isn't good, or you don't deserve to be there. It's just that the audience on that particular day didn't come. Like, when you've got a company, there comes this big thing of like, they must be like selling out all the time. I guarantee you now, every single company has had days where they've opened those like curtains and there's 3 people in the audience. I guarantee you now, every single company has had it at some point. And even like, even like big companies, I'm sure they have it as well. I watch a comedian. His name escapes me off the top of my head, but he's quite well known. Like,
Yeah.
and does like big tours like around like America and stuff. And he recently did like it was on TikTok where he was like, yeah, I got booed off the stage. I was in this place and I
Mm.
got booed off the stage, and he's like, that's never happened to me before. But he was like, it's just something that happens every now and then.
Mm.
And I think that as a performer and as a theatre maker, we kind of feel a bit ashamed, like that, like, oh, people didn't want to come and see my show, and we take it personally. But I think that that's only because we're only showing you know we're only showing the good stuff. Obviously, people will tell you our show sold out, but think about, for every show that sells
Yeah.
out, there's 100 that have sold out a single row. And I think that taking away that kind of that facade of it all is important. Like, for as somebody that's in a company, we've do you know what, we came out one time to an audience of 3 people, and do you know what the real killer was? Those 3 people weren't even together. They were a couple and one other random person. So they didn't even come together. And we were like, wow. So we went out onto that stage. We saw 3 people in that audience, and we went, well, we're going to give these
Yeah.
people are going to have the best show of their entire lives. And it was just, and we did it, right? And we did it.
Yeah.
And in a sense, like in a sense, I would even argue maybe it was one of the best shows we ever did because
Yeah,
as we were like, well, let's do it, let's make it good, and we're doubling down for these three people,
yeah,
you know. And I think, you know, I have no problems. I'm sure the guys will agree with me, or maybe not. Maybe I'm going to get a text saying, how dare you reveal our dark secrets? But
did
I
they
think,
watch the last one?
yeah, they
Did
did.
they?
Yeah, well,
Did
I mean,
they-
it's always reassuring because I went to them and I was like, you know, what do you think of that? And they were like, no, I think you definitely gave the answers I would have given, or like, yeah, or like, yeah, I know that you started talking about that, and I knew where you were going with it, so I was like, yeah. So again, like, I think we're pretty much on the same page.
Yeah, that's good.
Who knows? You might be really upset that I've revealed our dark past of having three people in.
Well, I've had quite a small audience before. It was meant to be quite small, but I think also you can get too much in your head about what the audience are thinking because it was so small that people didn't want to laugh at our jokes because it was too awkward.
Because you're the one person that can be heard.
Yeah, because I stood up in front of all these people and did my final joke. Why does Elton John not like lettuce? Because he's more of a rocket man. And it was complete silence. And
That is jokes. But
but
again, we have that. Like, everybody has.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's why I mean, like, Edinburgh is a very different beast to other festivals because of its scale.
yeah,
If you go to a different, like, fringe festival, like a smaller scale one, it's not like that at all, and it's a lot more kind of relaxed and more friendly. Um, I Yeah, is the
Well,
way
there are
I.
benefits to doing the Edinburgh Fringe then, because it sounds quite harsh.
It's a it's a brilliant experience, but I tell you now, you lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
It can be soul destroying in the ways that it's like, if you're
Oh,
not selling out, or you get, I don't
yeah,
know, if you get bad reviews, it can be like really demoralizing in that sense. Um, but as a theatre maker, it's a great experience to go and do and actually be amongst that environment and be around, like-minded artists, as well. And I think that's the thing about Edinburgh Fringe that I really loved, is that connection, like
yeah,
meeting those people, meeting the other companies. And because it's such a large scale, you can go to, you can walk out from one venue, go, oh, what's in that one, and then walk into it and there's a show on, like that kind of thing. Like, really being immersed in arts and theatre is brilliant. So as somebody that's visiting and enjoying the shows that are there, yes, like it's wonderful. As a performer, it can be a bit hard. Like, if you take a show to Edinburgh, you will be at a financial loss. Like, you will. There's
yeah,
there's no two ways about it. But if you that's the thing. Like, don't go to Edinburgh thinking that, oh, this is a good business investment, because the chances are it wouldn't be. But if you're going to go to Edinburgh and be like, I'm going to go there as a kind of holiday, I'm going to do my show, and then I'll get to go and see a bunch of stuff, great, then you'll
yeah,
love it. I think, one of the biggest costs is actually accommodation. That's one of
yeah.
the, like, pillars. So, but yeah, so I would say, think of it more like a holiday and like the chance to visit the experience,
Yeah,
as a business decision. But it is, I can't, but being there, I did love it, right? I did
that's
love it.
good.
When we took form in 2017, we were there for 3 weeks
Yeah,
of performing every single day, or sorry, 6 days a week, and just physically it became like it's a real drain. Like,
yeah,
for one thing, where our accommodation was, it was like 45-minute walk from the venue. So every day we'd walk 45 minutes to get to the venue. You arrive at the time before, when the show
yeah,
before. So you arrive there and we're like getting set up, like in the background. You can hear the other show that's happening in the venue, and you're like backstage, like, getting all your bits ready. And you're probably drained because this is, day 13 of doing it. And you're like, okay, fine. Um, and then, that show comes out, you move all your stuff in. Okay, here we go. Curtains open, you do your show. And then obviously, in the case of form, there was a long clean up afterwards. So
oh yeah.
out, but we'd have to like clear the space. It's like a really fast turnover between shows, so you'd like have to clear all of the stuff out of the space, and then the next show would go and set up. But then while the next show was setting up and like actually starting, we're in the background backstage like putting all the paper away or like re-scrunching the paper and like fixing props and stuff like that. So it felt like once you did your show, it was like, okay, let's get on with the day. Like now I can go and do
Yeah.
things to do. So and at the same time, Tom and I were writing our master's dissertations. So it was not particularly fun in that sense. But again, the fact that we then got to go and see a bunch of shows and like
Yeah.
meet up with a bunch of other like performers that we'd met before and like we were friends with, and like seeing what they were doing, like having a catch up, that's when it really comes to life um as a thing. Not to, so I'm trying not to put you off Edinburgh Fringe. Like it is great. Just go in there being prepared if you're going to take a show.
I wanted to ask you also about being a working actor, because on your blog you've said about how you have to balance all of the different jobs and stuff, but you're also rehearsing. So like, how do you fit that in timing wise?
It's difficult, like basically, so to put it bluntly, and it all comes down to a matter of organization. Um, in an ideal world, organization would be the answer to your question. It would just be
Yeah.
like, yeah, we have a schedule and we just make sure all the time slots match up. But obviously, life isn't like that.
Yeah.
There are things every now and then that pop up um, that like we have to shift the schedules around. But it's kind of a given for freelancers or for
Yeah.
that's kind of expected. So to when you talk to somebody or like when you're communicating with people that are also artists and stuff, there's a real like mutual understanding. Like if for when we're rehearsing we say, okay, we're going to meet on this day and we're going to do this thing, but then if something pops up like a I don't know, okay, yeah, oh, we've suddenly got a booking for a show next week,
Yeah.
we're gonna keep that rehearsal slot, but we're gonna change what we were gonna do. We're gonna rehearse this show instead of making this show. And sometimes like working like that on the fly, you just kind of have to do it basically. But it's tricky. And then besides all that, like you say, you've got your actual like job that brings in the money, how you pay your bills, and again, taking to demystify it, most people are in a position where they're working their everyday jobs as well. So sometimes like it can be difficult to work around those arrangements. Obviously, if you're somebody that's on a 0-hour contract, or that your work allows kind of a flexible working scheme, then you might be able to go, is it okay if I take the afternoon off on this day so I can do this audition? And your employer might go, yeah, cool, that's fine. Obviously, if you're in a employment situation where they're not so flexible, that then
Yeah.
becomes quite difficult. And in which case, you might have to think about, weigh it up basically. Do I need to be in this job, or should I use this job or go to a different job that's more flexible that allows me to do this other stuff? And I think that's some life admin basically.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. I've worked in jobs before where I was like, oh yeah, it started off when I was like, oh yeah, this is really flexible for me. Like,
Yeah.
it was when I was like working in a restaurant. I was working in hospitality, and it was like, oh yeah, it's really flexible because I had basically most of the weekdays I could just be like, yeah, whatever, I can do whatever around, and they were really flexible with that. But then it was like, no, but you have to work the weekends. But then because everybody else was working during the week and having the weekends
Yeah.
off, I was actually the one that was the hindrance in a sense.
Yeah, it's
So
hard.
it's that kind of like balancing around, like, and I said it at in the last interview, the only reason that we work jobs is to, enable us to pursue our passions. And if, the job is a hindrance to our passion, then that makes us we need to evaluate that and go,
Yeah.
well, weigh it up. Yes, the money's important, but could I be earning the same amount of money, but then also be working more flexibly around this thing that I want to, my
Yeah.
audition rehearsals, my X, Y, Z. you know, that's the thing. But also, you know, you can always have that discussion with your employer, you know, and put the case to them and say, look, I'm, you know, I'm auditioning for this thing. Like it's a one time, like it's a one time thing. I just need this particular day off,
Yeah.
and they might be able to be more flexible about it. But yeah, that's a
But
life.
it's hard, isn't it, when being flexible to actually earn the money you need?
Yes, it is very, very difficult. And also, like, you know, it costs money to go to an audition, right? You know, so sometimes it can be frustrating because it's like I can't work my job that day, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to be earning money, but I'm going to this audition, so I need to fork out for, you know, the travel and expenses stuff. Like, and in that way, you're taking a financial loss. But again, there's hopefully you would have, like, you know, been working. The key thing, make sure that the first thing you can actually pay off your bills. That, I suppose, number
Yeah.
one, as a thing, you need to be able to, like, do the bare minimum of, like, you know, afford your rent, you know, afford your electricity and gas, or, you know, your internet, your what, like, do you know what I mean, or your phone bill. Those things are key to everyday life, so make sure that you can pay those first and foremost. And obviously food, make sure that you're getting, you know, a balanced diet, because I tell you now, if you start trying to, like, going, oh, I'll do this audition and I just won't eat for the day, that's not going to be
Yeah.
helpful for your health, and it's probably not going to be helpful for your audition. If you're going into an audition and being like, oh, I haven't eaten anything today, you're not going to be
Yeah.
performing ability. So, you know, again, as with everything in life, it's about that balance, about, you know, weighing up what you can and can't do. Um, and everybody's situation is different. So, you know, I can't advise anybody. But obviously, you know, the one piece of advice is that I'm like, you can't sacrifice your health for anything.
Yeah. And I think as well, it can take time to work it out because I think lots of people want to find the answer straight away.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as with, again, everything in life, it's, you know, trial and error. You know, you learn by making the mistakes and then going, oh, I'm not going to do that again.
Any final advice?
I think the last piece of advice, you know, don't be fooled by, again, the facade. You know, we've spoken about it earlier. Like, don't be fooled by all the, you know, all these actors and professionals that are being like, yeah, I've got into this, and I've, you know, and I got this role, and it's my dream role, and something I'm going to be on film billboards and stuff. Like, yes, those are brilliant accomplishments, but most of the time we either fail or it's those small wins. And I think that, again, when I say fail, it just means in that
Yeah.
sense we weren't successful. But the to take away the facade, everybody fails in some capacity, as regardless, like, you know, even like famous actors, they will tell you that, you know, you can probably find these interviews like all over YouTube and stuff, like, where they'll tell you this was the role I really wanted but I didn't get it. And that's just part and parcel with the world, right? Sometimes we don't we aren't able to get those things, and, you know, it's important to bear in mind, I shouldn't feel ashamed, or, you know, I shouldn't feel like I'm a failure for this, because everybody has the exact same thing. And if there's nothing else, like, you take away from this interview, like, that I don't know it all, and we have plenty of embarrassing stories. And I'm not going to go into any more today. I feel enough, but, you know, just, it's part and parcel with the world, and it's actually healthier to be honest and open about those
Yeah.
things. You know, we know an artist, a scriptwriter, or playwright, she's brilliant, but she made a goal that was to have 100 applications rejected in a year, because what that meant was that she was then putting out as many applications as possible. And because her goal was to be unsuccessful 100 times, every time she was successful, she was like, now I need to do more. And that's the thing. So actually, those kind of things of, like, celebrating those things where you're not successful. Like, if you
Yeah.
didn't, you know, if you know, you went for an audition, okay, I didn't get the role, but you know what? Like, I I met some really cool people there, like, and I've kept in touch with a couple of them. Or, like, from that, you know, the casting director remembered me for this future role that, you know, came about a year down the line, and they invited me. Like, all of those little things are important to be open and honest and to actually discuss with people. You know, we've had shows that have sold no tickets, and every company will tell you that.
Yeah.
But obviously, you know, people just don't advertise that.
Well, that is good to know. I think that's some good advice. Do you want me to just link your social media? Is there anything else you want to promote?
All the social media stuff, yeah, I'm sure you can find it in the down below. Um, but obviously, yeah, thank you again, Lottie, for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back again. I'd like to say thank you so much to Rendered Retina and to Jordan for taking the time to do this, for sharing what you've shared. I found it so insightful and so helpful, so I hope everyone else has too. And if you've made it this far in the video, then thank you so much, and thank you for the support on all of the interviews. It really means a lot. And if there is anything you'd like to say, or if you have any questions that you wish I'd asked, then please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And maybe we'll do a part 3, see if Jordan's up for it, see if he's not as sick of me by now. Make sure you follow Rendered Retina on their social media, linked below, and also subscribe so you see the next interviews. Thank you so much. Bye!